Well, thank you for agreeing for that few minutes. I just continue to clarify the situation. So Chris is just going to clarify the situation, and we're going to move on.
In normal circumstances, what would happen is that a case would be investigated, an interview would be conducted, a note of that interview would be prepared, and then it would be shared, and you would get to one of two outcomes. Either the other party would accept that the note represented a fair reflection of what was said, or they would not accept it, and there would be comments or alterations put for the record. And therefore, the investigating team would either have an agreed note or not an agreed note. It seems to me, in the absence of that, and we don't know whether there was or was not, the question for the panel is: does that have any material bearing on their ability to determine matters before them today? My advice to them was that it doesn't in these circumstances. You had a recording of the interview, therefore you have a note, a source of material to refresh your memory of what was said, and the investigating officer's report was compiled in regard to her note. It's sufficient to note that there isn't an agreed note, but both parties understand what was said, and what we don't have here is a significant difference of fact. We know that there was a web posting, a blog posting. We know that the allegation came not from Steve Terry but from Maggie Fernton. And we know that the presenting officer considers that the comment on the blog post was sufficient to meet the allegations that are before Mr. Greenstein today, and I'm not wishing to preempt what might be said. Presumably, on the basis that he currently denies the allegations, his submission later will be that the nature of that blog post was such that no reasonable person could interpret as amounting to those allegations that are before him. I don't think the absence of a note prevents the panel from proceeding today and to properly determine on the...
Thank you for that, Chris. Thanks for that clarification. Shall we proceed? Do you have any further questions to the management side, or to the panel have any further questions? I have no further questions.
Well, I suppose the only question I would ask... Don't worry, I'm perfectly happy to ask you, to speak to you, working whatever way you wish, which is most comfortable. You would accept that there is no evidence that Steve Terry himself felt aggrieved at my criticism of him, on the basis of Maggie Ferncomb's evidence?
It's a very difficult question to ask, if you ask me to be honest, Tony, because obviously you're asking somebody to make an opinion on somebody else's opinion or something.
No, I'm asking you if she accepts there's no evidence that there is.
What I can say is that, as I mentioned earlier on, we had the rule book in front of us to guide us during that process, and both Mr. Taylor and Mr. Duncan were asked to look at the same section and to confirm and to sort of give their review of whether they felt that it breached it or not. And I only went through in my oral evidence the information that Maggie gave, because Maggie was the only witness that was here and she was the complainant. However, when we questioned Mr. Terry, which was on the same day as Mrs. Ferncombe, he identified that he believed the blog to be disrespectful and intimidating, and conduct that it could expose to ridicule, embarrassment or contempt, and conduct which had violated his dignity. They were both asked to look at the rule book and to say whether or not they, from their perception, from their own view, whether or not the information contained met any one of those bullet points, and they were the ones that Steve identified. He did not make the original complaint, that is correct.
Yes.
It was Maggie who made the original complaint as his manager, because she believed it was appropriate to do so. But Mr Terry was asked exactly the same as Mrs Ferncombe was in the meeting with the rule book, to look at the rule book and from his perspective to give to indicate whether he believes that the content of any of it met that, and at that point he did. He also described himself as sort of quite thick-skinned. So, but as I said, the nature of the issue was that I hadn't. Maggie was the witness, Maggie was the complainant. So a lot of our conversation focused on Maggie, but they were both asked the same questions.
She was the complainant.
She was. Correct, but
she was the complainant, but she made the complaint on the basis that it was likely that he had been held up to ridicule, treated with contempt, etc. So that is quite relevant to it. Can I put another question to you then? I didn't criticise Steve Terry out of thin air. I didn't write blogs about him because I had some private grievance that he'd done me some harm in the past and I was going to seek to gain revenge over him. It was a consequence of his work and how he had treated another member on an issue of principle. Let me ask you this question. How would a member, or how would a representative, which I was, for Stan Keeble, complain and hold to account a union official?
Can I stop you there? You mentioned Stan again, which is not relevant.
Well, I'm sorry, I disagree. It's irrelevant insofar as it explains my behaviour. It cannot be other than that, I'm sorry.
You may disagree, as chair. I'm asking you to refer to the allegations, not something which is not relevant.
Well,
so maybe you need to word it in a different way without mentioning the individual. Because it's not relevant to today's case, is it? I'm only trying to be consistent and fair to you.
Well, you may be consistent. I'm not sure you're fair, with respect, because everything I did arose out of the original sin, as it were. And that sin was wholly of Steve Terry's making, but let me phrase it in a slightly different way. How, if a regional official had behaved in an outrageous way towards a member, had refused to represent them, had told them they should plead guilty to a case involving very basic human rights, Articles 10 and 11 of the European Convention, how would that be taken up in a way that they achieved some measure of accountability and got the union to change its position in terms of failure to provide representation?
That wasn't part of our investigation, sir.
No,
Mr Greenstein did make those points during our meeting with him, and he made those views very clear. But that was not part of our investigation. My understanding, as I said in the presentation, is that Mr Keeble, whilst I appreciate it's not relevant, but there was a separate complaint that was made directly by the member in relation to Mr Terry, that was then made in writing to Beth Bickerstaff. And we didn't. That wasn't part of. That wasn't. We weren't then instructed to include that within the scope of our inquiry, so we were not able to look at that. And we then.
You were not instructed by whom to include it within the inquiry?
We were commissioned, instructed, asked, as in line with the rules, when a complaint of that nature is made, an investigation team is set up. You can use whatever phraseology you like, Mr Greenstein, but I was approached by Beth Bickerstaff and asked if I would undertake the inquiry. I said that I was happy to, and I assume that Mr Jones was approached in the same way. We were then had sight of the blog, as I explained to you. There was a delay in me having had sight of it, but we then tried to move quite quickly, because any kind of investigation for all parties, you want to expedite it as soon as you possibly can.
Well, you may want to expedite it, but if that's at the expense of achieving any measure of justice, then that's not necessarily a good idea. I put it to you that the cause of why I wrote the blogs in the first place, namely the treatment of Stan Keeble, was entirely excluded from the remit of your investigation, despite having made those points at the investigation. Indeed, is that not correct?
I understand that's your viewpoint, Mr Greenstein.
But would you agree it's correct?
I understand it's your viewpoint, Mr Greenstein, but it was not within the scope of our inquiry.
Yes, that's what I'm saying, that it was entirely excluded from the remit of your...
excluded implies it wasn't being dealt with. As far as we were aware, a complaint had been made in that matter.
Do you know what happened to that complaint?
Well, that's a confidential matter. I wouldn't have been privy to that information, just as they wouldn't.
You're unaware of that then? Are you? You don't know what happened? Is that
it would
general?
not be appropriate for me to know what happened with that investigation, because all investigations are dealt with confidentially.
Well, that's a separate investigation, isn't it?
Yes, but it's
nothing to do with today.
it's not just nothing to do today. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to be aware of it, because it is a separate investigation.
Again, I disagree that it's nothing to do with it. It's to do with why I criticised Steve Terry in the blog, namely his behaviour. And let me put it to you that there was no investigation of Stan Keeble's complaint. It was dismissed out of hand by Beth Bickerstaff. And furthermore, let me put it to you, I made a complaint about Steve Terry, and that was likewise dismissed. So in fact, there is no method of holding officials to account by the membership, is there?
And that's your opinion?
No, I'm putting that as a question. It's my opinion, certainly, but it's more than just my opinion, it's a fact.
Can I ask you something? Were you written to by Beth Bickerstaff to say that the complaint you made against Steve Terry wasn't going anywhere? Did you?
Yes, she sent me an email just saying it would be disregarded. I can't quote those exact words.
Just in case you just assumed this, I just wondered if it
No,
was substantial.
no,
It has nothing to do with the
take it.
investigation today, so we need to obviously give
Well, I'm sorry, with respect, what you're saying is that any matters germane to this, any background to this, is irrelevant. So, of course, you can interpret the complaint as being justified on a technical basis. What I'm saying is everything takes place in a context. My blog took place in the context. Its content took place in the context.
You'll have an opportunity to put that your case
Okay.
forward, I'm sure you will. Let's take the questions. Do you have any more questions?
Well, that is my question. Does she agree that there is no effective remedy for members of the union?
No, I don't agree that that's...
What would you say was the effective remedy?
Well, that's not for me to say. My understanding as both a former lay representative for Unison and also now as a member of staff is that we have a rule book that both staff and members of staff are expected to abide by. So if people have complaints, they are investigated in line with the rules to ensure consistency.
What provisions entail staff accountability, the accountability of officials? 'Cause the problem with the union surely is that in many ways members are accountable to officials rather than the other way around.
For anybody to answer that question, very, very difficult.
Oh, there are more difficult questions in this world than that. Surely not.
It's not relevant to the case. Let's stick to what the charges are.
I am going beyond the charges because the charges are a reflection of an attitude.
To elaborate that a little bit more.
Okay, I will wait.
Thank you. Do you have any more questions?
I have no more questions.
No. There we are. If that's okay, I have no more questions. I'm more than happy now to proceed to you presenting your case.
Okay, thank you.
I give you an opportunity to have a recess if you want, or you can just present.
Yes, if I can take a recess for 5 minutes. Yeah, that would be helpful.
I can grab a coffee, see. Thank you. Thank you, John. We seem to have been allocated the room with the access to the coffee. Is it? It's a coffee machine. It's a really good room to have as well.
Please.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Oh. The what? Oh right, God knows, I wouldn't know what a fern was, apart from a fern cum.
Yeah.
Don't worry, don't worry.
When you're ready, just give us a nod and
Okay, fine.
always.
Mm. Right, Mr. North must have gone to the toilet.
Yeah, he's gone to the toilet.
Yeah, okay.
So you're from Brighton?
I have been for the last 44 years, yes. But I came down from the north,
All right.
Liverpool.
You know, we had a long journey yesterday because Sunday I didn't realise all bus replacements,
Oh, yes.
replacements, and I left South Wales at 1 o'clock. I think I got here at around 9 o'clock. You know.
God.
Yeah, it was a really long one.
Yeah.
I had to go to Reading, then to Gatwick Airport, then somewhere else, then a bus, and then...
Yeah, no, I know what it's like, replacement. I lived in South Wales for a year when I was a kid.
Oh, far?
Merthyr.
Oh, yeah, it's not far from me, 40 miles from where I am.
Is it? Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, Merthyr to...
4 miles from Aberfan, which curves
How far in Merthyr?
Which part?
Yeah.
Ooh, Queen Street, I think it is. I went to Twin Rotten School, if you know
I spent
it.
a lot of time up there, because I was canvassing for one of the assembly members.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and I spent a lot of time up there for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I only spent a year there.
He was assembly member now.
Right, oh, well.
Yeah, so he spent a lot of time up there, so... Big character, right?
Indeed,
There's
yeah.
some responses when I knocked the door which I didn't expect.
Yes.
As you know, I'm like, oh.
Yes, it was the heaviest Labour seat. You won't remember S.O. Davis, I imagine.
No, well, briefly, it's a...
He was the most long-standing member.
I used to be like that in South Wales. We used to have people who were... I'd had an MP for 30 years, and I don't think we've ever seen him in my year.
Oh no, he was a very active left-wing MP. He was deselected, stood independently, and won. Yes. Yes. He was a legend, S.O. Davis.
Well, thanks for reconvening. This is your opportunity, Tony, to present your case. And obviously, once you present your case, then the panel and the management side can ask you any questions at the end.
Okay.
Take your time.
Okay, I will. What is the time? 12 o'clock. Okay, much of what I am going to say you will no doubt rule as irrelevant to the case. However, I'm going to make it anyway. It's your decision as to what at the end of the day you decide is and is not relevant, and I will not be party to those proceedings. However, it is integral to my case. And the first thing I need to say really is that there is an elephant in the room, and that is the question of what was the cause of me writing a blog, 3 blogs in fact, criticising a regional official, a London regional, I think secretary is it, or organiser, Steve Terry. I didn't pick his name out of the phone book or out of the Innocent handbook and decide that I would conduct a vendetta against someone because I didn't like the look of his face. Let me assure you of that. I came into conflict with Steve Terry as a result of a case that I'd been dealing with because I knew him politically, although I'm not a member of his organisation, the Communist Party of Great Britain, Stan Keeble. Stan Keeble expressed views at the demonstration, the Enough is Enough demonstration, a Zionist demonstration outside Parliament, you'll remember, March of 26, when all the anti-Semitism nonsense was kicking off in the in the media, and a group of us in Jewish Voice for Labour and others held a counter demonstration of which Stan and myself were part. And Stan ventured the opinion, in a private one-to-one conversation, mind you, that the Zionist movement collaborated with the Nazis. Now, I'm not intending to even go into whether that was right or wrong. It is irrelevant for the purpose of this hearing. But the fact is that Stan expressed his views. On the basis of those views having been secretly recorded and then broadcast on the social media, Stan found himself in the position of being suspended by Hammersmith and Fulham Council, which is where I came in. Because I have a law degree and I have represented people for, well, until recently when I was ill, I represented people for 15 years at employment tribunals on a whole variety of cases. So I am fairly well acquainted with legal procedures, and it was decided I was the best person in the absence of Steve Terry himself to represent Stan. Now, I only had one conversation with Steve Terry. It was a fairly short one. I'm not sure whether he was canvassing, but regardless, I put it to him that the case of Stan Keeble represented major points of principle for Unison, and indeed all trade union members, namely the right to express your opinion as long as it was not inciting racial or other racial harassment or behaviour. That went far and beyond this case. Stan has been dismissed and it is now going before Employment Tribunal. I would expect, almost as a matter of course, that the tribunal will find that his Article 10 and Article 11 rights have been breached under the Human Rights Act. That is the unanimous opinion of barristers who've seen the case. And for Unison and for Steve Terry to take the decision that Unison would not defend that case and would not represent Steve Terry, I think was scandalous and outrageous. And I found there was no way of changing that decision. There was no redress. There was no form of accountability. And a union is, in the end of the day, is or should be about its membership. That is what officials are there to do, is to represent their membership. Yet Steve Terry had taken the decision on the basis of his own political leanings. He is a councillor, he's on the progress list of speakers, he's on the right of the Labour Party, that he would have nothing to do with this. If he felt there was some personal reason why he could not, he could have of course handed it over to another union officer, but he chose not to do that. And that is why, as part of the campaign to defend Stan Keeble, I had no hesitation in blogging about this, because that was the only means of redress. I have to say that if Unison had supported Stan and had provided a legal backup, then he may well be in position today. So the consequences of what Steve Terry did are actually quite serious for the individual concerned. And I therefore have absolutely no regrets as to my role. I am not providing, in the event, and I'm sure you will find me guilty of what are technical breaches of the rules, I will not be providing you with any mitigating evidence, because if you apply for mitigation or provide mitigation in any case, you accept that you are guilty and you are asking for it to be taken into account. My position is quite clear, that I was justified in what I was doing. It was measured, it was reasonable, it was proportionate, and it was understandable. That it revolves around quite important issues of principle. Does a union defend certain basic rights of its membership? And one of the most basic rights is the right of members, A, to speak their mind, as long as they're not racially or sexually or whatever offensive. In other words, they don't breach the Equalities Act, which he didn't. And secondly, the right of free assembly, which was also under attack, because he was accused, one of the charges against him was he actually went on the demonstration to begin with. I can't remember exactly, but the nature of the charge was that you knowingly went on a demonstration where you knew your views might be challenged, which is an outrageous formulation, but that was the charge put to him by Hammersmith and Fulham Council. So there were two key articles of the ECHR which were breached, and for Unison not to take that up, I think, is a dereliction of duty by that regional official concerned. And I think Steve Terry knows that as well, because Maggie Ferncombe, I questioned her on that, and she was quite clear that Steve Terry, although he brought it to her attention, did not say that he felt humiliated or abused or intimidated. Although the charges are that it may do, that usually has some connection with what the effect is, and it's clear there was no such effect. I imagine Steve Terry felt aggrieved at the fact he was being criticised publicly. I would hope he was. I would hope that he would take it into account when he behaves in such a way in the future. But it was certainly not meant to hold him into ridicule, and there was certainly no contempt. I mean, if I go through the charges themselves, it was disrespectful. I don't accept that. I wasn't disrespectful. I disagreed with it. I mean, certainly didn't intimidate him. I mean, quite how you would come to that conclusion, I'm not sure. It may expose him to ridicule, embarrassment, or contempt. Well, possibly he would be embarrassed at what he did. In fact, I would hope he would be embarrassed. But for very good reasons, but I don't think ridicule or contempt are appropriate. As for conduct which violates the dignity of the staff member, that is taken, of course, from not only the Equalities Act, but all of the discrimination acts down the ages, and it's a definition of harassment, that you violate the dignity of the person concerned. I don't seriously think that anyone can suggest that I was harassing Steve Terry. I had one brief phone call, a couple of email exchanges. There was no further contact with Steve Terry, nor have I sought to. It's irrelevant now. I have no reason to want to have a contact with him. Of course, it's true in allegation 2 that I did not maintain strict confidentiality on a technical basis. I might plead guilty to that, but of course all charges have to take place in a context, and the context is that I had to break confidentiality in order to bring the wider issues to the attention of both the union members and the wider public. So, as I say, these are technical charges revolving around a very real issue. It's clear, of course, that Steve Terry had no serious grievance. I mean, he didn't like being criticised, but I don't think he was put out in any way whatsoever. It was during the investigation I had an exchange with Tony Jones, who was quite aggrieved when I described the investigation as a stitch-up. He wasn't amused, or he didn't agree with my description of it. He says, let me quote, in fact I'll quote from the transcript. There's 2 key passages. And Tony Jones says, so do you think this is a stitch-up? And I said, well, I think it's predetermined what the outcome will be. Clearly I'm being held accountable for having publicised the interaction between myself and Steve Terry. There has been no investigation into Steve Terry, how he has betrayed a member, how he has refused to help that member, how there is a conflict of interest between his role as the right-wing Labour councillor and his duty to defend that member. All that is by the by. There is no investigation. There has been no attempt to take up my complaint in response to Bickerstaff. So in that sense it is a stitch-up. Of course, the outcome is predetermined. I believe that officials should be held accountable for what they do, that the union is about its membership, not about its officials. The behaviour of Steve Terry is absolutely outrageous by any stretch of the imagination. Stan has a very good case. It's been confirmed by barristers I've spoken to. Terry totally ignored this advice, and when I spoke to him on the phone, he refused to discuss the merits. He knew everything himself, although I suspect he has no legal training at all. He knew that Stan should apologise, admit the offence, and fall on the mercy of the disciplinary panel hearing his case, whereas it was quite clear that his rights under the European Convention of Human Rights and therefore the Human Rights Act 1998 were engaged. Terry had a duty to defend the member, and his behaviour is outrageous. Who is holding him to account? No one at all. So yes, in that sense, I say this is predetermined. No one has suspended Terry for gross misconduct or undertaken any investigation at all. Unison is there, or should be there, to defend its members, not its officials. To which Tony replied, obviously I'm disappointed that that's what you think you know. And I reply, why are you disappointed? Well, I think I'm kind of disappointed that anyone should walk into the room and think it's predetermined. So that was our exchange, and then I continue a couple of pages or a few minutes later. You've asked me to put that in evidence to give context for why I have acted in the way I have. Sorry, this is Tony Jones, so it's in the third person. We have read it, but is there anything you want to highlight from it? This is my submission. Do you want to look at it? And I respond, no, I don't need to look at it. To me, the issue is a very simple one. I know Stan well. He's now been dismissed. The case is under appeal, and we'll see what happens. I will probably conduct the appeal. In fact, I didn't, because obstacles were put in my way. So Patsy, who is the secretary of the Hammersmith branch, conducted the appeal, but it is a fundamental issue getting to the heart of the rights of all Unison members. Are they able to freely express their views? And that right is guaranteed under the ECHR, Article 10. Can an employer sack and dismiss someone for simply expressing their views unless those views are racially abusive or intended to incite racial hatred? So, for example, expressing views as to what Zionism did in the 1930s in regard to the Nazis, which was a historical debate, which I don't want to get into. That is a fundamental right applicable to all workers. To fail to pick that up, to have no opinion on it, and to say you should plead guilty is outrageous. Even worse, new paragraph, is the employee was charged with having attended a demonstration, the right of free assembly, almost an absolute right. Again, Steve Terry is negligent, to say the very least, in his duty to members. He should be held accountable. It is outrageous that I'm being investigated and nothing at all is happening to him because his original decision not to provide any support has been upheld. That is amazing. Stan was sent something which said that he'd turned down the representation offered, which consisted of a silent representative, which was a way of telling the employer that Unison doesn't support you. Steve Terry had offered to go into the disciplinary hearing but be a silent representative, in other words, say nothing, which in the circumstances wasn't the most helpful way of expressing his support. Steve Terry should be under investigation. The fact that he's not speaks volumes to the nature of this whole process. Incidentally, the investigation cannot be kept confidential because it has wider ramifications for the membership as a whole. It's not personal to me. I don't accept I've done anything wrong, but the principle flows and ripples far wider. And that, in essence, is my case here today. That everything I have done, even if it's a technical breach of the rules, has to be seen in the greater context. And that's a principle of law. I mean, I don't wish to entertain you with an explanation of the law, for instance, on criminal damage, that there is a defence of justification. That's why people, for instance, the ploughshares into swords, or the other way around, swords into ploughshares group, which damaged equipment at the Trident base, were able to plead successfully their case that although they committed criminal damage in intending to save human life, they had a greater duty. That's what I'm saying here today. There may be a technical breach, but there is a wider issue which is far more important to the membership. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that, Tony. That's really helpful. Thank you. I don't know if you have any Tony's submission.
Just a few, if that's okay. Just a few things. Can you just, can you confirm that in the investigation I asked you questions in relation to the blog and whether anybody else had access to it? Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And just for the purposes of today, can I just repeat some of those questions just so that the panel are aware of it? Does anybody else have access to post information on your blog other than you?
Absolutely not. And
can you confirm that the blog that we originally investigated, that you published in relation to Mr. Terry, and the one that you drew our attention to on the day that we met with both of you, were both written, published and uploaded by yourself?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And nobody else could have uploaded information or written on those blogs other than yourself?
No, absolutely impossible.
And did you in fact say that nobody other than myself, I never give permission, and nobody other than myself has permission to write on the blog? Is that correct?
That is correct. Well, they sometimes provide guest articles, but I am in charge of the process.
Not in your name?
Not in my name, no.
And can you also just confirm that in relation to the blogs that you have written, although it's not relevant to the investigation, that you have subsequently to the investigation published another blog which included web links to the transcripts that you've just read from today?
Yeah, you're right.
You say that's nothing to do with...
Well, it's not. It wasn't. It was...
so don't make reference to it, please.
I think it's relevant. It wasn't relevant to our investigation because we were not aware of it. But my understanding in regard to one of the issues in regard to confidentiality is that a subsequent blog has been published with a link to the transcripts.
That may be the
of
case.
The recording.
That may be the case, but we have to deal with what the charges are, and that is not relevant to the charges. Although you can't link it in
I believe it's relevant to the charge of issues in relation to confidentiality.
I'm sure the panel will take that on board when they have the deliberations.
And I'm happy for that. Thank you very much.
Do you have any more questions?
No, I don't. Thank you very much.
I have a couple of questions, if that's okay, Tony. Thanks for your submission. I think that's helpful. Just when you done the original blog, I'm led to believe you was asked to take that down. Yeah? Did you?
No.
And what was the reason for you not doing that?
I think it was a matter of public interest. I don't think any purpose would have been served by it. Incidentally, I think most people who were going to read it had already read it. I agreed to take down the photograph, although I didn't see there was any point or purpose, since that was already, as we've established, publicly available on the Walthamstow Council website. But the blog itself was written for a purpose, and that purpose continued regardless of what was happening to me in the union.
I'm a bit surprised that you agreed to take the photograph down, because obviously if you took the photograph down, then but you still continue the blog.
I wanted to bend.
If you asked me to do something, and I, like yourself, feel that you don't have to do that, then why would you want to meet them halfway by taking a photograph? Clearly, by removing the photograph, you must have felt that potentially had a conflict. Otherwise, you wouldn't have removed the photo, would you?
Well, you're making a valid point, of course, but I wanted to bend over backwards, not to be seen to target Mr. Terry individually, and so it was not necessary for the purpose of the article that people knew what he looked like, although I think it's helpful when you talk about people to see what they look like. And I do that as a matter of course. You know, if I have an article on Jeremy Corbyn, I'll have a picture of him. No one will say I'm intending to disparage him because of that. Nonetheless, if exception was taken to the fact that a photograph was there, I was prepared to make that concession, but not the wider principle.
And you mentioned when questioned, and it was one of the questions I was going to ask, and thank you for that, about obviously all these blogs are all your own words.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And throughout your submission, you admitted to doing the blog, and you give a reason and rationale why you did it. Yeah. And you continue to feel that you were right to do that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And you have no mitigation.
None whatsoever.
I know I wrote it down. You said that if you had mitigation, then you feel like you've done something wrong, and you don't believe you've done anything wrong.
No, I don't. No.
I don't have any more questions. I don't mind panelists that way, but you know.
Not so much a question, more about, whilst we hear what you're saying about why you did what you did, I think the whole point, unfortunately, of this particular hearing is the breach of rule. And irrespective of why, we're really and whether we have sympathy or otherwise for that, we have to merely just look at the breach of rule, irrespective of why you did it. You know what I mean?
The decision, of course, is up to you, and you will make your decision accordingly. What I'm saying is that rules exist in the context. The union exists in the context, and that higher purpose, if you like, dictates what rules flow from that. And I'm saying the technical rules which I am held to have breached must be seen in the wider context of what Steve Terry did, which was to sell out a member who's been dismissed and betray a fundamental principle. And yet that has not disturbed anyone in the union.
Sailing close to the wind, but if you ask me to be honest, Tony, because obviously today's investigation is not about Steve Terry, it's about yourself.
No, I realise, but you have to take, or can take, things into context. Life is always like that, Yusuf, as I'm sure you're aware.
I think we need to end this now, because it's bordering on somewhere we don't need to go to. Let's stick to the facts.
Well, I'm giving you the facts. You may not like them, but I can't give you any others.
No, listen, I thank you for your honesty. I thank you for your submission. It's clearly given an insight into the reason and rationale why you've done it. And I'm sure the panel will decide. You have an opportunity to sum up, and I know that. And it's from the management side first, and then you have an opportunity to sum up.
Okay.
And obviously, it's entirely up to you whether you want mitigation after or not.
No.
Do you want to sum up?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that, so thank you very
A
much.
brief solution, I think, would be helpful.
Yes. I don't intend to repeat what I've already said. What I would confirm is that Mr. Greenstein has cooperated fully with the investigation. He helpfully brought the second blog to our attention during the investigation, so we didn't then have to reconvene. He confirmed that nobody other than him had access to the blog. Under the rules, you have a number of powers that are at your disposal, and a range of powers that are outlined in on page 85, 4.13, and a range of measures. Mrs. Franken was clear that it was the publication of the blog that differentiated, in her opinion, the need for it to be escalated to the Executive Office. And she did that because of her regional manager responsibility in regard to Mr. Terry's welfare. Even if he hadn't have wanted to, I think she, as she said today herself, she felt that it was sufficiently serious enough to do so. Mr. Greenstein is quite correct. He is entitled to his views and he is entitled to his opinion and he is entitled to articulate those. But equally, as a Unison member, he is equally responsible and accountable for our rules as they are outlined and as they are defined by and amended by National Delegate Conference. The rule book that we used was the 2017 one, because and we used that throughout because our investigation predated National Delegate Conference. I would say that I think that the public nature of the blog was inappropriate, and I also do not accept Mr. Greenstein's view that he believed that there was a wider public interest and therefore chose not to take it down. I believe that it is feasible to publish information where you can criticise somebody, but perhaps the language can be slightly different. You don't have to name the individual, and I think the nature of the public manner with which that was conducted, coupled with the subsequent blogs, in my view, mean that he has breached the rules as outlined
I'm sure the panel with that.
in that process, and I would ask you to take that into account in addition to the evidence that we've presented and the written report of the inquiry that we undertook as instructed to by the Executive Office on behalf of Unison. And I'd end at that point. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you. Would you like to sum up?
Well, I'm not sure there's any need to sum up. I think you know the issue. I am accused of breaching the rules, and my case is that although there may be a technical breach of some, I don't accept in particular quite the second charge. The explanation for that technical breach is the wider injustice that has been done not only to an individual but actually to the members of the Union as a whole. It's considered an extremely important principle. So I won't plead guilty, but I will say that the one negates the other. Okay.
Thank you. That you've been helpful throughout.
Thank you.
Just to talk through the process, the panel now will adjourn to decide whether there's a case to answer. But obviously, just before we do come back, I want to reinforce, if we do decide there's a case to answer, would get the opportunity for mitigation. Yeah. So we are going to adjourn and we can do that and decide.
Okay.
I think the panel can, if you waived your right to plead mitigation, which you have, whether or not you wish to adjourn, and then the panel will confirm their decision based on facts and sanction in a letter, or you wish to wait and hear the decision on the facts.
I would prefer actually to go, because I already made it clear to Beth Bickerstaff.
You did, yes.
I have an important meeting this afternoon.
And that's why we were so keen to try and keep to the time.
Okay, so I await what you send to me with interest.
Thank you again.
Okay, thank you.